Hi, everyone, and welcome to our March event for the corner booth. And I want to thank everybody for being here on behalf of the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center at the University of Houston Hobby School. And of course, I want to thank Dr. Inkster for his leadership in this club and getting this group up and going. My name is Allison Levecki, and my co-host Whitney Holt is here to join us today. And before we get started, just a little bit of etiquette about this session. We have some pre-prepared questions that we're going to discuss with the commissioner today. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then we usually get to a short Q&A at the end as well.
Just to echo what Allison said, we are so excited and so grateful to have you here. And again, thank you to Eileen for helping facilitate and let this happen. Just as a bio that I have put together from your website. So feel free to let me know if there's anything I need to layer in for next time. But
you can just leave it at here's Adrian.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was really interesting to hear that you've always lived in the second precinct. And so I will read the thing. So Commissioner Adrian Garcia has lived in Houston's second precinct for his entire life. The youngest child of Mexican immigrants, Adrian grew up in Houston's North Side, working in his dad's auto repair shop. He has a 35-year career in public service that began as a Houston police officer. He was appointed by Mayor Lee Brown as director of the mayor's anti-gang office, and then was elected to Houston City Council and appointed as chair of 2 city council committees, one for public safety and homeland security, and the other for minority and women business enterprise committee. Adrian continues his service by being elected to the office of Harris County Sheriff, the largest sheriff's office in Texas and 3rd largest in the United States. And today is completing his first term as Harris County Commissioner for Precinct 2. Some of his notable public service accomplishments include leading the effort to create the Houston Police Department's Real-Time Crime Center, creating the construction mitigation program that saved many family-owned businesses, saving more than $200 million in operational costs during his tenure as sheriff, eliminating chronic overcrowding in the jail and lowering crime every year, and adding 200 patrol deputies to keep businesses and neighborhoods safe. And as someone who has really lived out the values of civic engagement and grown up raised by Mexican immigrants, we are thrilled to have you here today to discuss how we can use policy to better empower immigrant communities and civic engagement. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive into our first question. What are some of the challenges that immigrants and their first and second generation descendants disproportionately face in their civic engagement, including but not limited to voting?
Well, again, thank you for allowing me to participate and for extending the invitation. I'm so honored and proud to be with you. But a very, very important piece of etiquette here is go Cougs, beat the Wildcats tonight. Okay, now enough of that. But listen, the real issue here, and I really appreciate the thought given to this issue, because obviously the issue in Ukraine is in the forefront of everyone's minds right now, and I just met with some folks who are expecting the president to add to the refugee cap potentially another 100,000 individuals. So when we speak of immigrants and the challenges that they face, we're talking about the global diversity that exists and that we tend to see here on any given day. In Harris County, we are amongst the most diverse in the nation. We speak over 200 languages or dialects every single day. And so ensuring that our government is working and welcoming, more importantly, is one of the key issues that are important for me. And as someone, as you mentioned, who is the son of immigrant parents and brothers and sister, most of who are Cougars, let me just say that it's critical to make sure that our democracy is alive and well and available for all to participate in. And so we need to make sure that we don't assume that just because you're here that you're proficient in English. And so eliminating language barriers is critical. And understanding that, a large portion of the immigrant community does exist in the service sector. So assuming that everybody will be able to take time off from work without any concern is something that many in the community do struggle with, because they may be allowed to take off from work, but they're not allowed to take off from work with compensation. So folks have to make decisions about their family priorities when it comes to this. And then also ensuring that technology is something that doesn't intimidate anyone any more than necessary. Recognizing that in other parts of the world, folks may be well versed with voting, but it could be voting without some of the modern day technology that we take for granted here. And so ensuring that technology is simple and easy to use. And then making sure that we have people, that are, they can speak the language or a language, that our ballots continue to be printed in the at least 5 languages, and we need to look at encouraging more. But we need to make sure that we're looking at the fact that cultural differences in language is something that still exists, and that our new voters don't feel intimidated or feel discriminated against when they step up to exercise their right to vote. So we've got some challenges, especially for those who are coming from other parts of the world and are new voters. I remember early in my community engagement life as a police officer, folks would say, "Why vote? Nothing changes," because where I come from, the same party has been in existence, even though the community doesn't vote for it. And so the issues of corruption and things of that nature are in the forefront of people's minds. So we have to really do our best to show people that we are a different nation, and that our process, when engaged, can create positive changes and demonstrate that people's voices and votes are heard and counted.
Great, thank you. So in recent years, there has been growing attention brought to the concept of privilege based on race, color, language, citizenship. When it comes to voting and civic engagement, how does privilege along these lines still exist at the interpersonal or policy level? And how do you see this privilege play out within the immigrant communities at a policy level?
Well, on a policy level, until recently, Harris County had an Anglo majority of policymakers at Commissioner's Court. And so we have to really recognize that someone who is the only American born of my family and an immigrant herself now sit as the chief policy developers of the county today. That didn't exist before. And so that privilege still exists in other places of our society. And, at city council, for example, there's a big discussion amongst the Hispanic community in that we only have one Hispanic council member, although the Hispanic community is about 46% of the population. And so in those terms, the privilege does exist. We're grateful, though, that I can't say for Harris County, but at least at City Council, although we've had, now 2 African-American mayors and a white female and then all white males be mayors. At least in recent history, those who have governed our city were concerned and interested in ensuring that all segments of the city are heard. And so, so I want to be careful to say that just because that diversity doesn't exist, at least at the city council, there was a lot of empathy for communities who may not be represented at the table. But obviously, the more that you can get people to the table is very critical. And then from the other side, as I mentioned earlier, that immigrant communities, are still working to build their family wealth, their personal wealth, and so working is and earning a income is still first and foremost in the minds of many new immigrants in our community. And so recognizing that that is the case for them, we have others of privilege who are making decisions and policies about them. And it is also important to recognize that I think it's helped me, even though I'm the child of immigrant parents, that in my summer vacations as a child, I lived in Mexico City for 3 months out of the year. So I got to see society from that perspective. And that really has helped me in my policy development and my advocacy and the reform efforts that I've led. But I do worry whether my daughter will continue to see the world through those same kinds of lens. And so the further we get away from that first generation, then we might also participate in some of that privilege. And so we have to be careful about not pulling the ladder up, as I sometimes say. So ensuring that we continue to understand and appreciate the challenges that many are coming from. The Ukraine, if I can go back to that, is sort of an interesting point right now for me, because my late brother married a Ukrainian, and I have a Mexican, Ukrainian American nephew. And so I'm watching the issues of the Ukraine with a great deal of attention. So now my brain has shifted to getting in front of the fact that we will be having more Ukrainian refugees in our midst. And so I want to make sure that we understand that and we're ready for it. Would I think the same if I did not have that family perspective? I don't know. I hope that I would, but those are the things that we have to be thoughtful about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And side note, like thoughts for your in-laws. I really hope that everybody fares well. I did really appreciate also what you, one of the connections you made about how one of the ways privilege plays out in a policy level is like having a representative who identifies like you, which brings me actually to our third question. So can you speak to why it matters that immigrant communities and their families have adequate representation in government? What is on the line if we are not acting now to create pathways for this?
I'll give you a real good example that I lived. And so I joined the Houston Police Department in 1980, and I was proficient in Spanish and speaking Spanish. And I would find myself doing the work of others because they couldn't speak with witnesses or suspects or victims. And so I would get called. I was even being called by the sheriff's office to go out to remote places of the county to deal with crime scenes because they had no one who was bilingual. And and you did it as a matter of, that was my job. But then we started to think about, well, look, we brought a skill to the table that the city didn't pay for. We weren't trained for this, but we're doing it. And so we worked to create a bilingual stipend for those who could pass a language proficiency exam. And so when you have, and thankfully at that time we had a council member who understood that, and Hispanic council member. And so he led the charge to help us create that ordinance. And then we also had at that time a Hispanic assistant police chief who recognized the value of it and also championed it internally. And so that's what happens when you have people who relate and have a perspective from issues that others may, again, take for granted or just not recognize at all. And so that is why it is critical that our government, our policy development process, our policymakers are as sensitive to our diversity as much as possible. And look, it even goes to women. That's a level of perspective that government is now getting closer and closer to fully embracing. We're having more women represent, and they become advocates of women in all regards: mothers, women in the workplace, women in public service. And so that is what happens when you have a representative in government who has access to the policy development process and can not only be a part of the creating the policy, but also a part of the advocacy when others around the table don't see a reason for it.
That's a really fascinating story, not only on how that came to be, but on a lasting legacy that you have in the sheriff's office. So this past legislative session, there was quite a bit of conversation around voting restrictions. And so I'm curious what power you and your office and other county legislators have in order to sort of circumvent or maybe even fight against some of those stringent restrictions, given what we know about immigrant civic engagement for those communities.
Well, I tell you that if you ask me, not enough power, but the power we do have is that we have directed the county attorney to sue the state based on those restrictions and that suppression oriented legislation that's been passed. I wish I had more, but I use my voice to speak against it. I have worked to educate folks to understand why it's critical for us to not embrace it and do what we can to make our democracy easy and accessible for all. And so we don't have enough power at this level. I wish we had more, but the power we do have is that we are now actively suing the state.
All right.
Sorry, I got so caught up in my fantasies of that playing out that I forgot to take myself on mute. Really optimistic and hopeful, but all right. So to follow up on that, how can policymakers enact more equitable policies to empower these communities to vote and become politically engaged? What are policies that have had success in other counties, cities, states, and what would it take to enact them locally?
I am a deputy voter registrar. I almost every member of my staff is a volunteer deputy voter registrar, and And so I believe that we have to walk the walk and talk the talk and be upfront and embracing whenever we find folks who are not registered to vote, and then do all that we can to educate and empower the community. And that's why, my slogan for my office is empower, educate, and engage. And we have to do that every single day on all fronts, including on encouraging folks to step forward and vote. I still come across people who say, "Oh, why vote if nothing changes?" And I'm like, hello, I hope I have brought meaningful changes to our community and my service that happened because people voted. And they're like, "Oh yeah, I didn't think about it that way." So it's always a work in progress. But to that extent, the reason why fighting the legislation that has been passed is because just as we've spoken earlier, the challenges immigrant communities face, they're real. I mean, if someone misses their job for an hour or two to go wait in line, and we were working hard to make the lines shorter and faster. Now they've gotten a little longer. That's income that can mean the difference between medicine or a roof over someone's head. And then to try to get people to validate, okay, I appreciate that you're saying voting is important, but my family, my shelter, my food, my medicine, I'm sorry, I'm taking care of this before I take care of that. And so that's why when we had the opportunity to vote for 24 hours, I did, because I worked night shift as a young cop. And I just thought it was cool to go vote I think I voted at 2 a.m. And I did it in solidarity of shift workers. I did it in solidarity of my mom, who was a janitor in office buildings and wouldn't get home till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so, we have to make voting easy for all. And that is how people are going to say, this is different from the country and the political experiences that I've had in my country. This is America. And this is what we have to stay very, very diligent about, and ensure that people say, wow, I voted for the first time and it was painless, not painful. And so these are the things that we have to continue to do. And so I'm hopeful that we can get back to 24-hour voting. I hope that we can get back to curbside voting because we want people to participate, but we just cannot have it be difficult to do so.
Great. And that in your last response, you talked about your office slogan around empowerment. And I noticed on your website that you speak to the empowerment that a community center can have for citizens. And so I'm curious how you incorporate voter engagement and civic engagement at these community centers that you speak of.
Well, just like I said earlier, almost everybody at those community centers is a volunteer deputy voter registrar. And then we have some of the machines on display. When we got the new machines, we had them out there as well to make sure people were comfortable with them and understood them and can touch them and work through them. And so, and then, if transportation is an issue, we also work to accommodate that for members of the community. So we try to be full service at our community centers and through the offices in general to ensure that people know that elections do matter. And if people listen to some of the rhetoric that's out there, if some could have their way, then a great deal of programs and resources that go to empower the least could literally go away. And so, we try not to be, I can be political because I'm the elected official, but by the same token, I just want to ensure that my staff has the resources, that anyone who wants to participate in the political process is given the pathway to get there.
I have personally written down like 5 questions I want to ask you during this open Q&A, but I will force myself to wait until everybody else gets a chance. So we're going to open the floor now to Q&A. You've said a lot of things that are really inspiring and some super tangible. Like, I'm going to figure out how to become a voter registrar myself. That sounds great. So opening the floor to everyone now for Q&A, or if you would like to type it in the chat, then I can read it out.
Professor Angster, yes.
Hi, Commissioner. That was very interesting. Thanks. I was really intrigued by you're talking about the Ukrainian refugees and saying we better get ready for them. It made me want to ask you this question about what do you mean by that exactly? Like, what do you think we should be doing? I mean, for Ukrainian refugees, but for all refugees and all recent immigrants. Some countries I think as far as I know, spend a lot more time thinking about this and having programs to welcome immigrants and refugees and get them settled. And I'm just wondering what, from your perspective, what kind of policy? I mean, I sort of want to know on a factual basis, like, what policies do we have, and what kind of policies would you like to see us have?
The policies that we have is obviously the office of, which is not a county office, but it's the Office of Refugee and Relocation, is a program that historically, I've worked with over decades, and historically they've always been in the Gulfton area, because apartment complexes is the easiest housing to make available for new immigrants and refugees. And I would go be part of the introduction of the city to them and let them know what the police department was all about, and how things work, and how they can report, and things of that nature. And what I mean by being prepared for that is to really make sure that we have that we're ready by understanding the culture, and then also making sure that we do all that we can to ensure that our printed materials are also welcoming and available. And from the culture standpoint, there have been times when culture and our laws have collided. There have been examples of that I've dealt with where a culture would deal with a code in a particular manner. Unfortunately, it created some minor welts to the child's body. And what do we see it as? Child abuse. But it wasn't intentional in that regard. And so we have to be mindful of these things and ensure that we're prepared to work with the community as they arrive here, and not find ourselves immediately at odds because we have not done the proper preparation for those communities. But that's just on a I'm speaking because the Ukrainian situation is in the forefront, but that's a work in progress every single day, and I'm excited. I've engaged some families that I found in my precinct that are from Ethiopia, and which is very unique for my side of town. But it also has me, this is all serendipity for me to a certain extent, because when my family came to Houston in 1959, we settled in Houston's Germantown because that portion of the immigrant population helped to build our rail lines back in Houston's history. And it was a German family. My mom and the family couldn't communicate, but she would come out with dishes of food to share with my mom. And so I remember these stories. And so it just reminds me that we have to keep that spirit alive and prepare as well as we can so that the experiences are as positive as possible.
Okay, I can't help myself just because it's on topic with what with the Ukrainian. So one of the interesting perspectives that I've seen being thrown around in the media, which I always realize there's like a caveat that needs to be said anytime somebody uses the phrase in the media, is that it has been interesting and in some cases painful to watch how America as a Eurocentric country has been very welcoming to the idea of these white refugees, when in the recent years we have not had that same spirit for Syrian refugees or people looking to come up from South America. I'm still in the place of like not sure how to ask this as a question. So I guess, can you speak more to like what that has been like in your perspective and what we can do to take this geopolitical experience and turn it into a lesson that like maybe positively encourages us to open this up more to other cultures in the future?
Let me say, it's a good question, because it has been frustrating that it just appears that immigrant communities of color tend to be dealt with differently. Otherwise, we'd have a border wall being built in with Canada, but we don't. And so elections matter. I mean, there's no other way to say it. If we just had a willingness by those who have the greatest leverage and influence on this system, and who would have a broader way of looking at the world, I think it would be a much better situation for us all. And as I say that, remember that this issue has been a challenge for decades for us. As I mentioned, Houston was well, the near north side was called Germantown. Well, a portion of the other side of my precinct, Denver Harbor, was also known as Podunk because of the Polish immigrants, and they didn't get along at one point. Italians, Asians, the Jewish community, for different reasons. Every single immigrant community has had their own turmoil in finding a place in this country. And it's, but historically, those who come from communities where they're not from Europe tend to have the most difficult pathway. So elections matter.
Okay, so Anna dropped a question in the chat for you, and she wants to know, running a campaign is no easy task. So how do we go about getting more individuals to run for office in order to add diverse perspectives to our legislative process and to help address priority issues within communities of color?
Yeah, and it is very difficult. I can't go through a metal detector without it going off because all the shrapnel I have in my body over my political campaigns. I always tell everybody after 23 years with the Houston Police Department, I decided to do something much more dangerous, and that's run for political office. But listen, number one, don't let it deter. Number two, running for office is not the only way to make an impact or a difference. I have a whole team of policy advisors. In fact, I'm proud that I have constructed a initiative, which is the first for Harris County, and that is to make the application for U visas, which are for victims of crime, much more structured and available for those crime victims. And we have also passed an initiative to help provide representation in detention centers because the research shows that with the proper representation, those in those detention centers are eligible to remain in the United States. And so, but how did I get there? Well, part of it was because of my previous experience, but I need smarter people than me to make it happen. And those have been my policy advisors. So think about your public service in that regard as well. But if you want to run for office, I'm someone who has invested in newcomers to the political arena, and so I'd be happy to offer any mentorship that one may want, because case in point, our county judge wouldn't be in office if I and others did not believe in her early on, and so I'm really proud of her work and her service, and we need more, and we absolutely need more.
Then shout out to Anna, who just got accepted into LBJ's campaign school, who asked that question. So I'm just going to shamelessly plug that connection right there on her behalf, because I think all right. If anybody else doesn't have questions, I still have more because I'm a super nerd and I'm very fascinated by all of this. I'll wait for a second and show some semblance of self-control.
Cougars have no self-control. That's why you're Cougars. Oh,
I just jumped in. Yeah, undivided attention to be able to discuss politics and policy with someone who's been in the arena is like my dream. So I love this. So I'm gonna speak actually for a lot of people on this call. I know that we are very invested in opening up convenient voting, so 24-hour voting, curbside voting in our communities, and seeing how we get that back. It does feel like of all the voter suppressive laws that were passed, that seems potentially like the lowest hanging fruit as far as like getting, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of legitimacy behind the decision to restrict that. So I'm wondering what paths forward you see, either from like an activist standpoint or from a policy standpoint, for what we could do to, if nothing else changes from SB1, right? How do we open those paths back up?
Good deal. Well, first, thank you for your passion and interest in that, because it's absolutely, pardon my French, it's asinine to work to make voting of all things so restricted. The number one thing that our entire society could crumble on at any given moment is our banking system. And yet I can pay online. I can access my bank account online. I can do it from my phone, but I cannot register online. I can't vote online. And so, it makes too much sense to accept the arguments that are out there. And look, absolutely, I want our voting to be safe and secure, without a doubt. But I want my bank account to be safe and secure as well. And I think it is. I have confidence in my banking system. But there are others who want to say that for some particular reason, voting is kind of like in a whole different universe. So from a advocacy and activist standpoint, number one, it's to get the attention of those that we know are the sponsors of those types of bills. And they have got to be able to say, why, what is the real argument for restrictions versus ease and flexibility? Why can't every other aspect of our daily lives have, I mean, we're having a meeting online. People can send me complaints about my work or my staff's work online. Why can I not stand here and say that's fraud? That's a fictitious email. That's not coming from a real constituent. Everybody loves me. That's not a real complaint. Why can I not take that position with that? So so really at the end of the day, it's tenderizing the naysayers and the advocates of those restrictive policies. That's where the real work is at. And then amongst, look, you're the next generation of county commissioners, of state legislators, of federal legislators. You're the future leaders. And so continue to speak amongst yourselves to ensure that regardless of what party you may end up, being on, that there's at least this one thing that we all ought to be able to agree on. And we cannot treat voting any differently than our financial reality. That one reality can devastate everyone's society, but yet we can send money across the world. We can buy things in other parts of the world, but for some reason, voting has to be archaic.
Wow. I think that's a great way to sort of wrap things up. I don't want to take any more of your time. You've been so gracious to share your time with us, Commissioner. And again, I just want to thank Dr. Inkster and the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center at the Hobby School. We just confirmed a date for our April event. It will be on April 7th, and we're going to be discussing the puzzle of women's health. So I hope that those of you who are interested decide to join us in just a few weeks. And again, thank you so much, Commissioner, for your time. This was a wonderful conversation, and we appreciate everybody participating and being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Go Cougs.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate you.
All right, good job.
He was lovely.
That was great. Yeah,
Yeah.
let me